I don't get why it has to be so hard. I've been told to be on camera more often. It's supposed to cement our artificial relationship while I talk about video games on the internet. Because what a great year it's been to talk about video games! In all seriousness, actually, without any stupid sarcastic shtick, it's been pretty damn amazing. And I think if you look at the playlist for reviews I put out this year, then that should let the amazing quality of 2015's games speak for itself. Out of 23 reviews, I can only really call 2 of them negative. Disliking Axiom Verge seems to have been just my opinion and my opinion alone, while the rest of the critical consensus seemed to agree that the first half of Broken Age was decent before an awful second half. Act of Aggression teetered so close to the edge between enjoyability and mediocrity that I can't really say I disliked it, but just about every other review was, at their worst, full of tempered praise. It all started in January with an HD remaster of one of the best horror games ever. The Order, 1886, released a tepid reviews a month later, but I only played about half of it before RE HD just made me want to play through old Resident Evil games instead. But the goodness of 2015 really began in March. That was when an inexplicable tide of super high quality releases were coming out one after another. It was ridiculous. Game of the Year contenders were releasing by the week, starting with Helldivers, then Hotline Miami 2, Cities Skylines, Ori and the Blind Forest, Bloodborne, Pillars of Eternity, Cryptid the Necrodancer, Invisible Ink, and Splatoon, all made for an incredible and unusually busy spring season. Summer gave us Her Story, Rocket League, Arkham Knight, Witcher 3, before the big holiday season sequel blitz of MGS 5, Fallout 4, and Just Cause 3. For just about every week of this year, I was playing something that was at least interesting, if not some of the best gaming I've had in years. And a lot of that came from games that were total surprises, with new IPs that weren't sequels that were managing to follow up on established ideas better than the established franchises. Among those surprises were Undertale and Duck Game, both of which came out of seemingly nowhere, as undermarketed pixelated indie games tend to do, but what was a new feeling for 2015 was the surprise of seeing big-budgeted games that seemed destined for failure ending up to come out on top. Meeting high expectations for an overhyped big game is satisfying, but exceeding the low expectations of a project that seemed doomed is downright thrilling. It's inspiring. Until Dawn was a PlayStation-moved peripheral narrative game whose closest comparison is the David Cage game subgenre, of all things. It got stuck in development hell for the past half-decade and looked like a shoddy imitation at worst, or a dollar store Resident Evil at best. But thanks to its smart writing, its good usage of QTEs, and its novel premise that's so well-suited for this genre that it's amazing no one's thought of it first, it might as well be the new gold standard for its genre. Rainbow Six Siege introduced itself at last year's E3 with the gameplay trailer shamelessly unrepresentative of the final product. Its first advertising pitch was full of so much fake-looking movements that it might as well have been pre-rendered. Plus, it had that weird The Division gimmick where voice actors pretend to be players.
Whoa, wait! She's down! I have to revive her! Cover me!
I got you! Get out of here!
This is a Ubisoft-made multiplayer-only AAA shooter that has terrible netcode and matchmaking bugs that released with bad reviews anyway, and I love it. It's a really clever game. It's a paranoid struggle of information warfare between counterbalanced character classes with hundreds of hours of replay value added to these 10 maps, thanks to their deep destructibility. And I can't stop playing. I got a few friends together and had the most fun I've had with multiple player shooting since Bad Company 2. And it's easily the most fun I've had with a Ubisoft game since, like Rainbow Six Vegas 2, I think? The Metacritic average may say one thing, but my genuine candid reactions say another.
Oh, hard fought.
I'm snorting.
Throw that one next to Splatoon and Rocket League and you can see how 2015 was particularly great for those creative small-scale team multiplayer games. It was also a great year for RPGs, for sandboxes, for cleverly writing supernatural horror. 2015's games had you taking breaks to return to a home base. They had you S-ranking missions, hanging out with dog companions, and navigating complex webs of decisions. They shared a lot of similarities despite spanning diverse genres, and it's hard to tell if that's because they're sticking to rising trends, or if good quality is simply a trend of its own. In any case, the dominance of big AAA sandbox games seems to be waning, just as the dominance of big AAA military shooters waned in years past. In the same year that Call of Duty further settled into its new sci-fi fantasy home, Mad Max released a tepid reviews with an interesting consensus that it was a perfectly fine sandbox game, just not creative or fresh enough for 2015. Just Cause 3 received a lot of the same reception, and after a month or two of retrospect, a lot of the same criticisms started to appear aimed at Fallout 4. Which, considering that, makes my choice of Game of the Year kinda surprising. While open-world games are increasingly more unremarkable as they become more normal, there's one in particular that simply had enough elbow grease and man-hours put into it to rise above the rest. The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt is a realized version of my childhood dream of what the games of 2015 would become. This is what adventure sounds like. This is what adventure looks like. A dashing hero, a dominant love interest, and a beautiful and untamed frontier create the closest thing to an adult Zelda that we may ever get. It's what I imagined as a kid, thinking about what a Baldur's Gate would look like from this perspective with this level of fidelity. You've got a city as big and busy as the Gotham of the competing Arkham game, surrounded by miles of farmland with an outer ring of war-torn wasteland that's more dense with depressing side quests than the competing Fallout. Teleport to the next map over and you're in a place iterating farther on the Viking fantasy than where Skyrim left off. But evoking the sights and sounds of classic adventure is only skin deep, and Witcher 3 goes deeper. This adult version of Zelda with its adult version of the hero's journey still maintains a moral compass. Though a lot of reviews may disagree, there is good and evil in The Witcher's universe. If you look at the endings of quests like Family Matters, Carnal Sins, and the game's various endings, you can see how that compass is set up to confuse you. Although in retrospect, the path to whatever good ends to these quests exist may be clear, your way there is always murky in the heat of the moment. The Witcher 3 punishes brash heroism and quick judgments. Playing a thoroughly evil Geralt who makes this world worse than what you start with is probably going to happen completely by accident, even if you have good intentions. Seeing through lies, spotting propaganda and passion, and failing to fall for red herrings, that's how you get the good endings in this one. It's a world not unlike our own, and its cheerful sense of humor, its upbeat and lively soundtrack, and more than anything else, its overwhelming amount of humanity make this one of the few cases where the mature rating on the box actually describes what's inside. And all that goes without saying how much work was obviously put into this thing. That's what really sets it above the competitors on a technical, if not artistic level. The most optional of side quests can branch off to these amazing self-contained stories that can last hours. Some of the best cutscenes and writing can be found in these obscure corners that are entirely locked out if you didn't even meet the right conditions in the previous game. It's a massive 70-hour sandbox game with quality to match its quantity. It's an uncompromising force of the classic old-school idea for a video game, and that's something that all its competitors had to scale back on. Unlike Metal Gear and Fallout, I can't readily spot any sore spots where The Witcher really dropped the ball. An incomplete second half and a low cap for role-playing options hamstrung those other two hugely marketed AAA Game of the Year contenders. While they were sweeping up awards and sales, Undertale, made mostly by one person, found itself competing against them in the very same categories of the Jeff Keighley Awards. And even that was more fun than usual this year.
But unfortunately, he was informed by a lawyer representing Konami just recently that he would not be allowed to travel to tonight's awards ceremony to accept any awards.
I mean, the story is a sore note, but the audience's reaction and the sheer guts on Jeff Keighley make it pretty entertaining to watch. Konami's scorched earth exit from the game industry was the year's most inflammatory, invasive, and spectacular news story. And it was a story that I actually found myself at the center of for a couple weeks. Konami has left AAA gaming by way of passive-aggressively pushing their employees into quitting and restructuring studios into gradual, eventual uselessness. Sure enough, the rumors were true, and Metal Gear Solid's creator is now in the hands of SCE Japan, which, all things considered, is definitely not a worst-case scenario. But that's not a best-case scenario either, because Silent Hills is cancelled, PT has been pulled from the only legit place to download it, MGS5's second half was a train wreck, and besides that, what other Konami games have we been looking forward to anyway? Unlike during the bankruptcy of THQ, they didn't have to auction off their IPs. Nor did they choose to. Silent Hill and Castlevania got turned into pachinko. We may never see a real video game effort from a Konami IP again, and Igarashi is now having to take risks with Kickstarter. You might soon forget it, but 2015 was also the year they decided to revive the Tony Hawk games. And then they died. Again, super duper fast. Battlefield Hardline released this year, and more people ended up playing the previous one anyway. The new Battlefront has too little maps and too little depth. Splatoon, Mario Maker, and Xenoblade were probably the only things creating headlines for a Wii U that looks increasingly close to death, so Nintendo is now compensating their slow business for a mobile partnership with Dina. Valve's plans for paid mods got shot right out the door, and Payday 2 became Pay to Win Day 2. Haha. But negative news stories felt, to me at least, like footnotes to 2015's positivity. They were exceptions to the rule. For every bit of bad video game news coming out, at least 2 actual good video games were coming out. Plus, the general flavor of financial news seems positive as well. The PS4 continues to sell strong despite its small lineup of exclusives. Halo 5 broke the franchise's sales records, despite falling under the critical one, and MGS5 also made for a similarly successful launch as well. Which means it's hard to remember how much more dire the forecast was 3 to 4 years ago, just before the launch of the current console generation. Low profits, an average consumer that was fleeing to cell phones, and some weariness for the old standby genres might have pushed for the greater level of quality and diversity that we're seeing, particularly in AAA games this year. Because between Rainbow Six, Witcher 3, and Metal Gear Solid, this has been the first year in a long, long time where I've genuinely enjoyed going through those kinds of overproduced experiences. The kind of unwieldily expensive experiences that were predicted to die off by now. The kind that would have usually been tunnel shooters. This time, the AAAs didn't railroad you. They weren't BioShock Infinite, they weren't Spec Ops The Line. The Order, 1886, petered out as a dated prelude to a year of expensive games that were a hell of a lot more flexible. For a few fortunate projects, their AAA budget ended up getting put into hugely open-ended, hugely interactive, system-driven games, and I'd totally be okay with that trend continuing. 2015's been great. Honestly, maybe one of the best ever. And when you look back at the past 20 years, you have 1998, 2004, 2007, 2011. You have these really great, amazing knockout years that tend to rotate in and out every 3 to 6 years. And I bet in the future people are going to look back at 2015 and maybe list that among all those others as well. It's always such an exciting, emotional rush, experiencing a year that might be a historical milestone, but of course we won't actually know if it's a historical milestone until far into the future, which means that for now the only real thing we should be worrying about is if 2016 can stack up. 2015 set such a high bar that it'll take a lot of effort and a lot more surprises for 2016 to meet these high standards. But we'll find out. We will find out.
In the next episode.
Dragon Ball Z! That's the end of the video.
There you go.
Next episode of